The night is the color of wet stone. A boy sits with his back against a wall of rock in a ravine so narrow he could touch both sides if he stretched out his arms. Above him, a strip of stars. Around him, nothing but shadow stacked on shadow. He is maybe 16. A sling is tucked into his belt. A wooden club, worn smooth by years in his hand, rests across his knees. Somewhere behind him, in the dark, 100 sheep are pressed together, breathing, waiting. And then he hears it. A footstep. Not his, not one of the sheep's. Something heavier, moving low along the rock, testing the dark the way a predator tests the dark. Patient, unhurried, certain it has all night. Oh, the boy doesn't move. He doesn't call for help. There is no one to call. Out here, in this valley, he is the only thing standing between the flock and whatever just stepped into the dark with him. Hold on to that, boy. We're going to come back to him. Because what you're about to hear is the world behind 6 verses that almost everyone on earth has heard, and almost no one actually understands. The Lord is my shepherd. You've heard it at funerals. Maybe you've seen it stitched into a pillow or framed on a wall in your grandmother's hallway. Psalm 23 has been read over more deathbeds than almost any other passage ever written. And here's the problem with that. This is not a poem written for the dying. This is not a children's story about sheep. This is not a soft, gentle prayer written by someone who never knew real fear. This is a survival account, written by a man who had been in that ravine, who had felt that footstep in the dark, and who, years later, sat down and turned that memory into the most quoted prayer in human history. In Hebrew, the word for what that boy was doing out there is roe, shepherd. It sounds like a small word for a small job. It wasn't. So, for animals that could not find food on their own, could not find water on their own, and could not defend themselves at all, the shepherd was the only thing standing between them and the dark. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what that boy heard that night. And you'll understand why, out of every job in the ancient world, God chose this one to build his most famous prayer around. Jesse of Bethlehem had 8 sons, and when the prophet Samuel showed up at his door, sent by God, carrying a flask of oil in his bag, Jesse brought out 7 of them. Tall ones, strong ones, the kind of sons a father lines up when he wants to make a good impression. Samuel looked at each one. The oldest, Eliab, looked every bit like a king should look, and Samuel felt nothing. No sign, no word from God. So Samuel asks the obvious question, "Are these all the sons you have?" And almost as an afterthought, Jesse says there's one more. The youngest. He's out with the sheep. Sit with that for a second. 7 brothers stood inside, washed, dressed, ready to be looked at. The one God had already chosen was outside, alone, smelling like wool and dust, doing the job nobody else wanted. His name was David. When they finally bring him in, and you can almost picture it, a teenager standing in a doorway, dirt still on his hands. Samuel doesn't hesitate. He takes the oil and pours it over David's head, right there in front of his brothers, and anoints him as the future king of Israel. Hold on to that. The oil. We'll come back to it. Here's what most people miss about all of this. Just the man who would one day write, "The Lord is my shepherd," wasn't borrowing an image he'd heard about in a story. He was describing his own life. Before David was a king, before he killed a giant, before he wrote a single line of scripture, he was the one out with the flock every day, while everyone else was busy with things that seemed to matter more. So when he writes, "I shall not want," he isn't talking about wishing for nothing. He's talking about a flock that lacks nothing. It actually needs, because someone is making sure of it every single day, whether the flock ever notices or not. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Here's something you probably don't know about sheep. Moving water, a fast stream, a rushing current. It terrifies them, and a thirsty sheep will turn away from it rather than get close. So part of a shepherd's job, every single day, before the flock ever moved, was to go ahead and find, or dig out, a pool. Calm, still, quiet enough that a nervous animal could finally put its face down and drink without panic. Grazing worked the same way. A flock doesn't wander into green pastures by luck. The shepherd walked the land first, scouted it, decided where the flock would eat and where it would sleep that night, long before the flock arrived. Which means, by the time the sheep got there, the hard part of the day was already finished. Someone had already done the work. All that was left for the flock to do was walk in and lie down. Stay with me, because the next verse takes this even further. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. The Hebrew word for soul here is nephesh. It doesn't just mean the quiet, spiritual part of you, the part that prays, the part that shows up on a Sunday. Nephesh means your whole life, your appetite, your breath, your exhaustion. When this verse says God restores the nephesh, it isn't describing a pep talk or a passing comfort. It's describing a full recovery. Body, mind, everything that's been worn down. Maybe you know what that feels like. To reach a point where you're not just tired, you're depleted, all the way down. That's the word this verse is reaching for. And paths of righteousness. In Hebrew, ma'aglit tzedek, literally means something closer to the tracks. The worn ruts left in the ground by a flock that has walked the same safe route over and over for years. Think about what that means. A good shepherd doesn't invent a new path every day and hope it works out. He uses the path that's already been tested, already proven safe, already walked by flocks before this one and survived. So put the first 3 verses together. I shall not want, because someone is providing ahead of time. He maketh me lie down, because someone already scouted the ground and prepared it. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness, because someone already walked this way, and it held. 3 verses in, and you can already see the shape of this psalm. It isn't about a passive, easy comfort handed to people who did nothing. It's about someone doing an enormous amount of work, quietly, ahead of time, so that by the time you arrive, the only thing left for you to do is walk in and rest.
It is written.
3 verses in, and already this psalm is not what you thought it was. The still waters, the green pastures, the nephesh, the whole self, fully restored. Every image so far has a shepherd doing the hard, invisible, ahead-of-time work so the flock can rest. But we haven't gotten to the dangerous part yet, because the next verse starts with the word yea, which in the original is closer to even. Even when? Even in the worst place. Even in the valley where the light doesn't reach and something is moving in the dark. That's where this psalm goes next. And it's worth staying with. If this is your first time watching this channel, welcome. If these deep reads into Scripture are the kind of thing you want more of, hit subscribe. It's free. It takes 2 seconds, and it means you won't miss what's coming. And drop a comment below. Tell me if you've ever heard Psalm 23 explained this way before, or if this is hitting you differently than you expected. Because we are just getting started. 3 verses in, and already this psalm is not what you thought it was. The still waters, the green pastures, the nephesh, the whole self, fully restored. Every image so far has a shepherd doing the hard, invisible, ahead-of-time work so the flock can rest. But we haven't gotten to the dangerous part yet. Because the next verse starts with the word yea, which in the original is closer to even. Even when? Even in the worst place. Even in the valley where the light doesn't reach and something is moving in the dark. That's where this psalm goes next. And it's worth staying with. If this is your first time watching this channel, welcome. If these deep reads into Scripture are the kind of thing you want more of, hit subscribe. It's free. It takes 2 seconds, and it means you won't miss what's coming. And drop a comment below.
Welcome, friends.
Tell me if you've ever heard Psalm 23 explained this way before, or if this is hitting you differently than you expected.
It looks beautiful.
Because we are just getting started.
Consider the lilies
Yeah,
of
though I
the
walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil,
toil not,
for thou art with me.
neither do
Thy
they
rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
He spoke of
The Hebrew word buried in the middle of that verse is tsalmaveth. It is a compound word built from 2 roots pressed together. Tsal, meaning shadow, and maveth, meaning death. Not a dark valley, not a scary place. Shadow of death. The translators who gave us the King James Version weren't being dramatic. They were being precise. These ravines were real. They are real still. The wilderness between Bethlehem and the Dead Sea drops through a series of steep, narrow gorges. Wadi beds cut into the limestone over thousands of years, where the walls rise so high and press so close together that even at noon, the floor of the canyon sits in near total dark. George Adam Smith, the Scottish geographer who walked this same land in the 19th century, described these paths as the only viable routes for flocks moving through the Judean wilderness. There was no way around them. To get from the highlands to the lowland pastures, you went through. A shepherd who wanted to keep his flock alive had 2 choices. Leave the flock where it was, on ground already overgrazed, already exhausted. Or walk them through the dark canyon, staying close, and hope that whatever was waiting in the shadow didn't move faster than he did. Every single shepherd chose the canyon. And here is what most people miss about what that required. The psalm doesn't say, "He carried me through the valley." It doesn't say, "He went ahead of me." It says, "I walk through." The flock still had to move. The shepherd being present didn't remove the dark. It didn't flatten the walls or widen the path or guarantee that nothing would come out of the shadow. What it changed was the answer to the question every frightened animal was asking in that canyon. Is someone here who knows what to do? This is not a promise that the valley won't come. This is not a promise that the shadow won't be real. This is not a prayer that takes you around the hard thing. This is the testimony of a man who walked into the hardest thing he had ever faced and discovered that he was not alone in it. Now watch what happens next in that verse. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Two tools. Two separate words in Hebrew. The shebet, a short, heavy club made from the knobbed root of a tree, carried in the shepherd's hand or tucked into his belt. And the machina, a long crook, taller than a man, used for guiding the flock along a path, for reaching into a crevice to pull a trapped animal back to its feet. The shebet was for fighting. The machina was for rescuing. One tool to drive back whatever came out of the dark. One tool to reach down into whatever hole the sheep had stumbled into and lift them back out. And both of them comfort the sheep. Not just the rescue tool. Both. Think about why that might be. The flock has walked in enough canyons to know what the club means. It means the shepherd has seen something. It means danger is close. And still, the sight of that club, raised in his hand in the dark, calms them. Because it means he knows. It means he is ready. It means the darkness has not surprised him. Josephus, writing in the 1st century, noted that the shepherd's role in Judean society was considered one of the lowest, unglamorous, isolating, held in low social regard by many in the towns. And yet it required a specific, earned courage that almost no other profession demanded. Shepherds weren't born brave. They were made brave, one night in one canyon at a time, until the darkness that once terrified them became simply the place where they did their work. You may be in a canyon right now. Not the limestone kind. The kind where the walls are a medical result you didn't expect, or a relationship that has gone somewhere you never thought it would go, or a version of your own life that no longer looks like what you planned. And the question you're carrying, maybe without even putting it into words, is the same question every animal in that flock was asking. Is there anyone here who knows what to do? The psalm doesn't answer that question with a theological argument. It answers it with a memory. The memory of a boy, alone in a canyon, with a club across his knees and something moving in the dark, and what he discovered that night about who was standing beside him. We are about to go back to that boy. Go back to the boy in the ravine. He is 16 years old. He is the youngest son of Jesse of Bethlehem, which means he is the one nobody thought to bring inside when the prophet came. He has been out here long enough that he knows this canyon, knows where the walls narrow, knows where a predator would wait if it wanted the advantage of surprise. And tonight, something is here. In 1 Samuel, chapter 17, David tells Saul something that almost gets skipped over in the rush toward the giant. He says, "Your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck it and killed it." Read that again, slowly. He didn't wait for the lion to leave. He went after it. He chased it into the dark, caught it by the face, and killed it with his hands and the club at his belt. the shebet, the same tool he'd been carrying every night for years, the same tool the psalm would one day call his comfort. This is where Psalm 23 comes from. Not from a quiet moment of reflection in a palace garden, not from a theology lecture or a priestly ritual, though it comes from a teenager in a canyon with a lion who came out the other side of that night knowing something, knowing it the way you only know things you have survived, that God had been standing there with him in the dark. "I will fear no evil," David writes. Not "I felt no fear," not "I was never afraid." He was afraid. Of course he was. He was 16 years old and something with teeth was moving in the shadow. But the fear and the presence of God occupied the same space. Both were real, and one of them was stronger. Here's the part nobody tells you. The Hebrew word translated as follow in verse 6, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me," is radaf. And radaf doesn't mean follow, the way a shadow follows you down the street. Radaf means pursue, chase, hunt down. It is the same word used in Scripture to describe an army in pursuit of a fleeing enemy. It is an aggressive word, a relentless word, a word with legs and intention behind it. David is not saying that goodness and mercy will drift along somewhere behind him if things go well. He is saying that God's chesed, his covenant love, his loyalty that never runs out, his stubborn refusal to let go, is actively chasing him. Through every canyon, through every year of running from Saul, through every failure and every throne room and every midnight when everything fell apart. Chasing him. And if that's true for David, if the man being hunted by a king still believed he was being chased by something stronger than the king, then what does that mean for you? "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over." There is a night recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 20 that most people read as a political story. David is in the royal court. Saul is the king. And Saul has already, by this point, thrown a spear at David twice, sent soldiers to kill him in his sleep, and is actively planning to finish what he started. Jonathan, Saul's own son and David's closest friend, is trying to hold the situation together. And David sits down at the table. Not a table in a safe room. Not a table with allies around him. The table of the king who wants him dead, in the same room, with the knives close and the king's eyes across the meal. There is a practice recorded by the 19th century missionary W.M. Thompson, who spent decades among Bedouin communities in the ancient Near East and wrote about what he saw in careful detail. In that world, if a host set a meal before a guest, even an enemy, the act of eating together was a covenant of protection. The host was bound by the deepest law of hospitality to defend that guest from harm for as long as they remained under the roof and the meal was on the table. The table wasn't just a meal. The table was a shield. So when David writes, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies," he isn't describing a picnic in the middle of a battlefield. He is describing the moment when the God of the universe sets a covenant table in the exact place where the danger is greatest and says, "Sit down. You're covered." Not after the enemy leaves. Not once the canyon is behind you. Right here, right now, in the middle of it. Thou anointest my head with oil. Remember the oil. Samuel poured it over a teenager standing in a doorway, smelling like sheep, while his brothers watched. That oil didn't make Saul step aside. It didn't make David's life easier. What it did was mark him, permanently, in the record of heaven, as the one God had chosen. Before any battle, before any throne, before any proof that he deserved it. Your cup runneth over. Not just full, over, past full, no, more than enough, at the exact moment when there should be nothing. Sheep cannot lie down when they are afraid. It is not a metaphor, it is biology. Flight animals require 4 things before they will rest. No threat of predators nearby, no tension or conflict within the flock, no tormenting insects driving them to keep moving, and no gnawing hunger from inadequate food. All 4, not 3, not most of them, all 4 conditions, or the flock will not settle. A flock left to itself almost never rests. The shepherd creates the conditions. He checks the perimeter. He settles disputes between animals. He rubs oil into the sheep's faces and ears to drive off the flies and parasites that torment them through the long summer months. And a flock that has been oiled will finally, gratefully, go still. He provides the grazing that removes the hunger. He makes them lie down. It is not passive. It is an active, ongoing daily act of provision and protection. That is what "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures" has always meant. Not that the world becomes safe, but that someone you trust has checked everything: the perimeter, the water, the path, the dark at the edge of the field, and is telling you, it's all right. You can rest now. Jesus knew this psalm. He had grown up with it, the way every Jewish child grew up with it. Folded into memory, said at meals, carried through the years. And in the 10th chapter of John, he stands up and says something that would have stopped every person in that room cold. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Not a hired hand who runs when the lion comes. Not someone doing a job for a wage. The shepherd who goes after the lion, who chases it into the dark, who catches it by the face in the canyon and does not let go. Not because the sheep are impressive, not because they found him, not because they deserved it, but because they are his, and he does not lose what is his. David the shepherd became David the king. And then the one David's whole life was pointing toward, the son of David, born in Bethlehem, in the same hills where David's flock once grazed, stood up and said, I am what that psalm was always about. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. David wrote this psalm as a king. He had the palace now, the throne, the armies, the weight of a nation on his shoulders. He had also lost a son, betrayed a friend, committed sins he could never fully outrun, and survived years of sleeping in caves while the most powerful man in Israel hunted him through the wilderness. He had been in every kind of canyon. And this is what he writes at the end of it. Not I survived. Not I made it through. Not the darkness finally lifted and the road got easier. He writes Radaf. He writes that goodness and mercy, God's stubborn covenant, never running out chest, are chasing him. Have always been chasing him. Will never stop. all the days of his life, the good days and the canyon days, the throne room and the cave, the oil on his head and the spear in the air above it. Every single one of them, pursued by something stronger than all of it. And then the final line, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The Hebrew underneath that word, dwell, carries the sense of returning. Sitting back down in a place that is yours. Coming home, not as a guest, not as a beggar at the gate, but as someone who belongs there, who has always belonged there, and is finally, after all of it, back. David the shepherd, David the fugitive, David the king, David the man who failed in ways that still bear his name in the historical record. And at the end of all of it, home, in the house, forever. Pay attention to this. That is the arc of the whole psalm. Not an easy arc, not a straight line from safety to safety. Ulma, a valley, a canyon, a table in the middle of a room full of enemies, a cup that overflows in the worst moment, and then, at last, a house with a door that doesn't close. 3 things to take with you. The first, this psalm was never soft. Every image in it, the green pastures, the still waters, the rod and the staff, the table, the oil, came from a world where survival was hard, daily work, and the shepherd earned the flock's trust one canyon at a time. When David calls God his shepherd, he isn't reaching for a gentle picture. He is making the most audacious claim a man in his world could make, that the God who holds the universe is doing for him what the best shepherd in Bethlehem does for a helpless flock, personally, specifically, ahead of time, all the way through. Knows? The second, Radaf is chasing you. Whatever canyon you're walking through right now, and if you're honest, most of you are walking through something, the Psalm's final claim is not that God will show up once you get out. It is that goodness and mercy are already behind you, already moving, already closer than the thing you are afraid of. You don't have to earn your way back to the pasture. You are being pursued toward it. The third, and this is the one that should stay with you longest. A 16-year-old boy sat alone in a ravine with a lion and a club across his knees and no one to call for help. And he came out of that canyon. And he spent the rest of his life through failures and thrones and canyons he never expected, convinced that he had not been alone in there. That conviction became 6 verses. Those 6 verses have outlasted every empire that existed when David wrote them. They have been read at more bedsides, in more languages, in more moments of absolute human extremity than almost anything else ever written. Not because they are comforting, because they are true. Which line of Psalm 23 hits you the hardest right now? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. The Lord is your shepherd. He was in the canyon before you got there. The table is already set. The oil is already poured. And something ancient and relentless and good is running behind you, has always been running behind you, and it will not stop until it brings you home.